Welcome to the Autosportradio.com 2020 show. We are still, strangely enough, allowed into the Grand King race shops to do our programming. Of course, we got to thank Bill and Stephanie Throckmorton for letting us come in here and do this. Today's show is presented by Honda and Honda HPD, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the NTT IndyCar Series, SVRA, and of course, McGilvery's Pub and Eatery in Speedway. And incidentally, they open tomorrow, Friday at noon, on the patio. So if you're in the area and you say, geez, I haven't been to McGilvery's in a while, not only can you eat and get a drink. Want to remind you that everybody's favorite doctor's appointment, of course, is a dentist. And I highly recommend the best one in the state, the Indy Dental Group. Dr. Jack Miller, veteran of the 500, and his wife, Dr. Liz Lewis, have absolutely fabulous practice. So give them a call, make an appointment. Number is 317-846-6125. And if anybody is like I am, which is quite a few people, and you have trouble with your computer, which I do almost daily, we have a new computer guy, A-plus affordable computer doctor, Dr. Steve Freeze. He is a doctor. Like the old days, he makes house calls. So call him up, tell him your problem. If you need be, he can come by you. The number is 317-328-0766. And if you ever wondered why these guys and gals love driving Indy cars, find out for yourself. Take a ride in the Indy Racing Experience two-seater. You can go online to IndyRacingExperience.com, find a date that works for you. And in the promo box, put DK1, you get a 50% discount. Or call the office, talk to Shonda, number 317-243-7171. Is it time to renew your insurance for your home, your car, your commercial property? Do what most of us have done. Call Mike Pardee at VP Insurance, 5004 West 16th Street in Speedway. He can help you with everything. You get better coverage for less money. I found it out because I do it. Number is 317-248-0070. That's Mike Pardee at VP Insurance in Speedway, 317-248-0070. And if you're into vintage racing, you got to go to svra.com and subscribe to Speed Tour magazine. Get all the things that's going on with the vintage world as well as Trans Am. See what's going on. Great pictures, great stories. First class magazine. You'll love it. SVRA.com, Speed Tour magazine. Subscribe. And while you're on SVRA.com, check their schedule out. There's been some changes in it, and I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but you want to know where they're going to be and when? Check it out. Should you have an interest in having a vintage car, if you have one that needs to be restored, the Grand King shops can handle it. They have several cars for sale, or you can have yours restored. Just give them a call, let them know that what you want and what you got or what you're looking for. The number is 317-820-3595. And if you want to take a run by the shop once things start opening up and take a tour of this place, it's really worth the stop. Call ahead of time and tell them you're coming, so make sure someone's here. Again, the number is 317-820-3595. Now, this weekend, should it have run, the Indianapolis 500, it would have been an anniversary, the 70th anniversary of Johnnie Parsons' win back in 1950. Joining us today are two of his offsprings. The one young lady that I've known for a while, she is an outstanding young lady, and she is married to Jim Voyles, probably one of the finest defense attorneys around, and she has agreed to join us. And her sister, who is calling in from Bristol, Connecticut, Patty, is with us, and we're going to find out what was life like being the daughters of a 500 winner, and that's only part of what he did. Please welcome Joanie Voyles and her sister Patty.
Hello.
Hello, ladies. How are you?
Thank you for having us.
You know, it's when you read about your dad, he was a heck of a race driver. Even before he got to Indianapolis, he was obviously very good, won many races, championships, which is what got him there. But he was a very interesting guy, and people loved him.
Yes, they did. Mr. Gentleman John, they called him. Mr. Personality, handsome, friendly, and adored racing. Just adored racing. That was what he was going to do when he was a little guy.
He was very popular. He was very popular with the fans. They adored him very much, yes.
And he did very well for himself on a number of occasions. He was pursued by Enzo Ferrari to drive Ferrari cars, and that's kind of an interesting story, how all that turned out and what he told them when they offered him a ride.
Yes, he went there. Was it 52? I can't remember, 52 or 53. Enzo called him over I think it was, wasn't it, Patty? 52 or 53. And yeah, he went over and he tested and he beat everybody. They were so impressed with him. Donald Davison can tell the story better than most of us because, you know, Donald went around the world with Dad on that national car renter tour. And he heard every story there ever was about Dad because they were together for how many months, Patty? 3 or something. Yeah, it was a long time. He probably learned a lot he didn't want to know about Dad, and Dad about Donald too. But no, it was an interesting story, and he could have gotten the job, but our dad, he says, I race to win, and you have to understand that it is all about the manufacturers, and we didn't race that way in Indianapolis or anywhere in the States. And probably it was hard for Dad to understand that it was Ferrari to win. It didn't care about the drivers, but he did refuse him. Enzo was furious with him, furious. And Dad maybe did what, what's his name did in the stock car last night and gave him the bird, but I don't know. But it was, I'm glad he didn't. I'm glad he didn't because you know how dangerous our racing was in the 50s. We lost so many friends. We did. And it was worse over there because they didn't have even some of the safety features that we had in the United States. So it was interesting. Yep.
Well, Patty, I was told by Joni very kindly, she mentioned that you are a bit younger than she is. Was your dad, when is the first recollections you have of what he did and who he was?
The first time, my mother tells me the first time I went to a race, I was 6 weeks old. And
I bet you don't remember much of that.
No, no. I remember just always being at the racetrack. We would travel from LA to Indianapolis in April, and we would live in Indianapolis in Speedway from April through September, and he raced all season. That's where we based ourselves for the first several years of my life. And then when he retired in 1959 at the Speedway, that was the last year that we went back there, and we continued going to the races on the West Coast from there. But I've always gone to races. I always remember racing. My first childhood memories are from Speedway. It's curious, not from Los Angeles, but from Speedway, because playing around in the grandstands with the other drivers' kids and all the neighborhood kids, and just always being at the racetrack.
Dad stayed, when he first came back, he and Lila and Patty stayed on 13th Street, and they were at the Grabels, Jerry Grabel and his family. Mom, Dwayne, our stepfather, Johnny and my stepfather, Patty and I have different moms. My mom was Arza, and her mom is Dad's second wife, Lila. And so they lived on 13th Street at the Grabel's house at first. And then we lived with a lady on 12th Street right behind there. Her name was Verna Odie, and she worked at the Real Silk. Remember the nylon stockings they made?
Oh, yeah.
Real Silk. And I think they ended up also making, I can't think, parachutes. I think they made those too. But then our family started growing and we got too big. So then we rented a house over on 14th Street. But then Dad and Patty went 2 houses down from what now is Dawson's. And her maiden name was Rosie. She was a Rosner from Rosner's drugstore, but her name was Rosie Ost, Bill and Rosie Ost, and they had a big family. And that's where Patty and Dad and Lila lived in the summertime. So it was, and then across the street where Patty and her husband stay now, tell them that story, sis.
I feel like I've come full circle. We found this house to stay in, because like they used to do back in the day, the residents of Speedway would rent out rooms in their homes. And this one very kind lady was renting out some space in her home. And it turns out, long story short, it's the house across the street, two down from where we stayed when I was little. And this house is where Bill Vukovich used to stay. So staying in called now the Vukovich house. And I told this story to Bonnie, the lady that owns the home. And she says, I was wondering why that person was out in front of my house taking pictures. She didn't realize that she owns what is called the Vukovich house at this point in time.
Now, Patty, I've been told that, and part of it by you since we started talking before we started the program, that you started in California doing hair and makeup for television and movie people, and you're still in it, but in a different direction.
Yeah.
How did you get from California to Connecticut?
Well, when I was pregnant with our child, I reviewed the situation living in Los Angeles, and I thought, maybe we shouldn't necessarily raise our child here anymore, because it's not like it was when I grew up there, when my parents grew up there. So we decided that we would relocate to the East Coast to be closer to my husband's parents. So we ended up in Connecticut, and we've been here for about 25, 26 years now.
And what do you do there?
Well, when we moved, I didn't know what to expect in terms of my career, because I had just been working in Beverly Hills doing hair and makeup, and I had clients that were in the entertainment business, and I started working in production, local films, low budget films, commercials. So I didn't know what to expect when I relocated to Connecticut. But once we got here, I started doing research, and I found that there were production companies, and there turned out to be quite a bit of production work. And I started doing local productions, commercials, and lots of corporate videos and industrials. And one day I got a call from a lady at ESPN, and they needed to have someone come in and cover the makeup department while she and the other makeup artist at the time were off doing the ESPY Awards. So that's how I got into working at ESPN, and I've been there for 25 years now.
The two people, the gal that called you and asked you to stay in, is she still there? Did she not get a job when she came back?
No, there for quite a while, but she ended up retiring a few years ago. And now we have another lovely lady running the department. And the staff has grown from 4 people to about 24 people now. And we have 3 makeup rooms, 4 makeup rooms, not just the one. And it's grown as the company has.
Now, being involved with ESPN, I trust you are involved in sports or interested in sports. Do you get to follow racing closely?
I do. I follow racing. It's always been a major part of my life. I've always gone back to the Indy 500 ever since I graduated high school. I go back every year, spend time with my sister, my brother, all of the friends. It's like a homecoming going back there. And also, after my dad retired from racing, he was always involved in racing, one aspect or another. So we did travel to lots and lots of races, whether we were just spectating or whether dad was working, doing something. It's always been a major part of my life.
Did not I read in one of the bios somewhere that your dad did get into film a little bit?
Oh, yes. Yes. His first association was when Clark Gable and Barbara Stanwyck came to the Speedway to film a movie, I believe it was for MGM, To Please a Lady. And it just so happened that that's the year my dad ended up winning the race. And he was technical director because he was national champion at the time. So he was technical director on the movie. And Clark Gable had a ranch at the time in the San Fernando Valley. And that's where my parents were living. So they became close friends, and they maintained their friendship after the filming of the movie. And then he was involved in a few other productions over the years as technical director, or doing some stunt driving. He was always involved. He even had his Screen Actors Guild card. It was the movie The Roar of the Crowd, I believe, that he had some actual lines and he was in a few scenes.
Very interesting. He also became a competition director, I believe, out on the West Coast. I'm not sure if it was for USAC.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was the West Coast midget supervisor for many, many years. Yes.
Isn't it interesting how you get into a sport like that? You become a driver, your family then gets associated and gets part of it. It's part of your life. I know Joni was telling me this year, if and when they run it, will be your 69th consecutive. And the only one I know, Joni, that's even close to you is Nancy Hanks or Alice Hanks.
Alice. Yeah, and Bill Marvel too. Bill said he's been there for a long time too. But 69 years, and this year's, it's really strange. My husband's right behind me a few years in coming, and it's really hard not to be there. We're all sad, like everybody else though in the world. It's sad, but you know what? We couldn't have anybody better to have bought the Speedway from the Holman George family than Roger, because Roger loves racing just like the rest of us do. And if it had been bought by Formula One or anybody else, I think they would have tried to take it down. And Mr. Penske and his family are not going to do that. And we will have a 500-mile race either in August or in October, but we're going to have it. We might have to distance and wear our masks, but you know what? We're going to have it. He'll see to it. I'm sure of it.
And the interesting thing about Roger currently, he has said that this isn't, a disaster. It's an opportunity. And he is continuing the upgrading of the place. So stuff will be done if and when they run it that wouldn't have been done otherwise. I mean, it would have been done after the race and next year, but it's going to be done now. And I think fans, when they come here, are going to go, holy Toledo, look at this.
Yeah. I texted with David Calabro a little while ago, and he's a friend of the family, but told him, he said it's just different. And I told him about Roger. We're so happy he bought it. But he said, he saw him out there today on the golf cart, and he was directing. He said the Speedway looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I talked to S.J. Ludke, who's part of the media division, heads up, and she said when they have a meeting, she says, inevitably, I end up sitting across from Roger. For some reason, that's what it ends up. And they'll be discussing something that has nothing to do with my department, but he'll look at me and say, what do you think? He wants input from everybody.
Yep.
If you got an idea, he doesn't have them all. He'll listen. And that, I think, is huge.
It's why he's so successful, and people need to stop. A lot of people, for a successful business or anything, need to listen to the people who have been there or know it, know the business. And we can't know every part of it, but you have the good people around you that do. And there are some good people at the Speedway, and he's kept most of them, I think. So, which is good. Johnny and I grew up, in Speedway too. And we have some really fun stories about the roadie kids, but one, which I think I've told the story before about our dad. He was into a lot of Hollywood stuff, and he knew Mel Torme and Doodles Weaver and everybody. But one time when we were living, it's when I got to come to live with Mom and our stepfather, Dwayne Carter, in 1950, right after Pancho was born, my half-brother, same mother, in 1950. And then in 51, then Johnny came in 1952. But one afternoon, we were at Mrs. Odie's, and it was after school, and we were at the house, and those are the old house, they're on, it was 5014, or I can't remember what it was. And my dad walks in with Roy Rogers. He brought Roy Rogers to the house to meet Johnny and I. And Roy Rogers walked in, and back in the day, the lights hung down in the middle of the room. And he walked in, and Roy's white hat came off because he was so tall. He hit the lamp and knocked his hat off. But oh my gosh, Johnny and I we couldn't believe it. It was crazy. Lots of good stuff. We were lucky enough to, our stepfather raised us because Dad quit racing and went back to California. But our stepfather was a great dad and one of the finest race drivers too, especially sprint cars. And he did his own work. And few people know, I know this is about my dad, but Dwayne was really good to us. He had right next door behind on 12th Street where the Grables live, he bought a lot on 13th Street. And that's where he put his sprint cars that, Troy Rettman drove for him and a lot of people drove for him. He had 2 cars. And so he would not build a house on that lot. He was so superstitious because it was on 13th Street. He didn't. And it sat there, and that garage is still there. It was a 2-car garage, but he wouldn't build on it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I know one of the things that's noted about your dad's win when in Victory Circle is the custom, whoever the starlet is or whoever it is that's there will come up and kiss the winner. And apparently, from what I recall, it was more than just a little peck.
That's what we heard. Dad was hot, and so was she. No.
Yes, I don't know.
Tell Patty about what she gave Dad and Lila.
I think that Barbara Stanwyck had a little crush on Dad. She wanted him to come to Hollywood. She was going to set up a screen test for him at the studios because she wanted him to be an actor. He was handsome enough, but he said, no, appreciate it. Thank you. And
tell him about the dog.
As Joan was mentioning, one of the gifts that she gave Dad after he won the race was a Cocker Spaniel puppy dog. And my parents ended up naming the dog Penny from the song Pennies from Heaven because it rained when my dad won.
Yes.
Pennies from Heaven.
Very interesting. Now, your brother Johnny was an accomplished driver in his own right. And I was interested to ask him how much pressure he had being Johnnie Parsons, although spelled differently, but still it was his son, on him when he started racing. But he's not here, so I can't ask him.
I don't think there was any pressure because Dad and Dwayne were always behind Johnny and wanting to help him. And our dad bought him his first quarter midget, and Pancho and Dana were all 3 of them all raced quarter midgets. And Mom would haul us all over. We were in Las Vegas. We'd go to nationals, everywhere. And when Dwayne could be there, he would be there to help. But Mom was the mechanic. And she was. Mom could do everything. She was a woman before her time. She even raced behind Dwayne in the Mexican road race. And not many people know all that stuff, but Mom was a lady before her time in many ways. But she was a fine driver, and Patty and I probably could have been race drivers too, but back in the day, we had our little gloves and our hats on, and we dressed up to go to the races, so we looked good.
Right.
There's a really funny story. We could go on for hours, but there's a funny story about our dad and Patty's mom. Back in the 50s, they all wore hats.
Yep.
And they had beautiful big brimmed hats because we all dressed up. Well, they were all loaded up. This was before maybe Patty was born. I don't know. She wasn't in the car, but Dad said that all these hats he was driving along were flying off the top of the car, and he knew they were, but he wasn't going back to get them. Lila was known for packing too many suitcases, and Patty used to, but she's better now. She used to come stay with us, and she'd have 5 suitcases. I said, what the heck? But that was a funny story about Lila and her hats.
Joni, Jim is quite a bit involved, or was, in racing.
Yes.
He and Tony George opened the 16th Speedway at Busch Stadium.
Yes, we did.
Yes. And
Yeah.
what has been his connection with racing? Just a love for the sport? Was he into it when you met him, married him?
Oh yeah. His uncle was George Ober, and George Ober was he was an attorney, and he represented a lot of racing people. He also helped with starting USAC, being the lawyer. He was, if you look him up, Google him, whatever, and then he ended up being a judge in Speedway. That was Jim's mother's brother, George Ober. And they all sat sometimes around our table on 14th Street with Dwayne, because he became the first director of competition in 1956. And they all sat, and everybody was family, and they figured out with Tom Benford how to get everything started. Benford was a real businessman, and he wanted it to be real businesslike, and AAA was good, but they needed to start the new association. And so Jim's Uncle George did that, and he was involved, and Jim was looking through some paperwork that we have so much racing memorabilia downstairs, and he was looking through some old papers of some old race drivers and funny things that Uncle George had represented them for. Some of them was kind of drunk driving, and some was
Really?
Oh, really? But it was, he's been involved since he was a little guy, and he just hasn't stopped. He loves it. And he did race for a while. A lot of people know that. He did race SCCA when we first got married, and he shared a car, Formula V car, with Rick Cammon, another lawyer in town, because they couldn't go to all the races. But because we have 6 kids, I have 4, Jim had 2. When we got married, there was too much going on with sports, and he wanted to coach them, and he had to work to make money to support us all. So, but he's been involved since he was a young man. He has good stories, which I'm sure he's told you. He's been on your show a couple of times.
Yeah, yes. Patty, is your husband into racing?
Oh, he's a big fan. He loves it. He knows more about it than I do. I'm telling you. I don't understand. Yeah, all kinds of racing, drag racing, IMSA racing, all kinds of racing. He loves it. He loves it.
Well, that's good. Does he come back to Indianapolis with you every year?
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Are you planning on making a trip back here in August?
Yes, we are. We already switched our flights. We're coming.
You'll probably come in October too, I'll bet.
He's talking.
Yeah.
Of coming to the harvest. He wants to do this. Yeah.
Well, I've heard this talk that the possibility of running it in October is very real, I guess. Now,
Yes,
what that will do, if
thing.
anybody will go ahead of that, I don't know. But tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to talk to the guy who should know. He does the scheduling, and he works with television to put everything together. And I know he's been going crazy because things are changing and canceling and moving. Oh, boy. So we'll talk to Stephen Stark tomorrow. But,
Good.
Being the daughter of a 500 winner, how many people, I know Joni around here, they know you, but Patty, do people have any idea? They say Patty Parsons. Oh, I wonder if you're related to Johnnie Parsons.
A few people at ESPN, I must say. And it's not so much now, but years ago, when I was younger, it was more prevalent, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and Tony Stewart's been there, and who are the other drivers that Jim knows? And you told me they're coming. I said, you tell them to say hi from us. And then Tony Stewart loves Dad and all kinds of racing. And then when you're sitting there putting his makeup on and talk about it, he says, oh, you told me stories about it.
Well, it's kind of hard because when Tony Stewart was there, a couple times I wasn't there. I just happened to have the day off. So one time he was actually there, and I was there, and I heard he was there because he came late, so he didn't come in the makeup room. So I had to go into the studio. So I just brought the powder, the anti-shine, really quick just to get the shine off. And while I'm standing there doing his makeup, the powder, with all these people around him, because I always have people around them, producers and PR people, I'm looking him in the face and I'm powdering his face and I'm going, I have to tell you, my brother is Johnnie Parsons, my father was Johnnie Parsons, and my brother-in-law is Jim Voyles, and my sister Joan says hi. That was all within like a minute or two, and then I finished and I walked away and he went and did the show. But after the show was over and he was leaving, he was walking down the hall and he saw me and he says, tell your family hello for me.
Do many of the drivers come out to ESPN to do programming, or is the world such now they don't have to, like we're doing with Zoom?
They do. I have to say they came more often when ESPN was actually covering the races, but they don't have the contracts for too many races anymore. They do a lot of the call-ins, remotes. They call them remotes.
Well, you know, it's kind of neat to think sitting here myself, and I've been coming here since 1964, although I did know your dad won, and I paid attention. This is a sport that you get into, and the people are so good. The crews, I mean, you don't have the problems in this sport that they have in other professional sports by a long shot. And I think, you know, once you get hooked on it, you're hooked. You're there for life. I mean, I'm approaching, I'm going to be close to Joanie pretty quick in age, and it's time for me to back up.
Wait a minute.
But I love it. I love it. I love the people in it, and you know, I just enjoy the sport completely, and I'm still here.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. People, they enjoy it. They get to see it on TV, and then I say, well, have you ever been to the races? Have you ever been to a car race? They say, oh, no. I says, you have to go. There's nothing like it. You can watch it on TV, and it's exciting and the racing, but it's nothing like being there. When you hear the sound and you actually see how fast they're going and the electricity in the air, it's very exciting. It really is.
Patty, what's the name of the guy Neil that you invited to come to the race? He's on ESPN in California. Tell him about him. Oh my gosh.
Well, one of the Sports Center anchors is Neil Everett, and we became good friends here in Bristol, and then he was transferred out to California where he works out of the LA studios now. But a few years ago, he wanted to come to the Indy 500 because he's never been. And I said, great, super, come. So he came and he hung out with us. He went to every event with us, and he was just blown away. He had no idea. He'd been to other major sporting events, obviously being a sports anchor, Super Bowls, World Series, Kentucky Derbies. He said that nothing like the Indianapolis 500. It's beyond belief. It's nothing can compare to it. It's just amazing. The amount of people that are in one place at one time, the electricity, the pageantry, it's amazing. Amazing.
And then he went back and he was on his show the next week and he said hi to all of us because we partied in the backyard. It was so much fun. Patty, you need to tell him about your association with Paul Newman because it's really interesting story.
Yeah. Okay. Years ago, when we were still in California, we were going to a sports car race at Riverside International Raceway. Yep. And our brother, was driving a car that was owned by Paul Newman. So we happened to be in this little tiny motorhome, and Paul comes in and he's introduced to everybody in the motorhome and he shakes everybody's hand. And that was, oh God, I don't know, 30 something years ago, a long time. So now I moved to Connecticut and I get working in the production community, and I get a call to go work on this shoot, and it turns out that it's Paul Newman. Long story short, I ended up doing his personal makeup for videos and his company, his Over the Hill gang.
Uh-huh.
whenever he has videos that he says, I'm sorry I can't be there tonight, congratulations, those kind of things, right? So I worked with him for about 6, 7, 8 years. And mostly what we talked about was racing.
People don't realize he loved racing. I know his wife was not that excited about him doing it, but he loved it, absolutely loved it.
He did.
We did a few location shoots at his house, and he has what they call the barn. His house is on one side and the barn's on the other. Well, the barn they have converted into like a screening room, and that's where he kept all of his racing trophies and certificates and Oscars. And his wife Joanne had one side, and she had her Oscars and her movie, and then he had his racing and his movies memorabilia. And it was very impressive, and I was very honored to have the opportunity to be in this space at his personal location. And the trophies that he had, I mean, pictures. I mean, he drove sprint cars. He's known for his sports car driving, but and his ownership of the Indy car teams. But he just loved racing, all kinds of racing.
And he was a gentleman, a true gentleman.
Funny. He was so funny. He would tell stories about the practical jokes that he and the other stars and the racing people played on each other. He was just a gem. He was a wonderful, wonderful gentleman.
Well, I got to meet him a few times when he was with Ray Hall,
yes,
Carl Haas, Newman Haas Racing. I ran into him a number of times and talked to him. He was really a nice, very friendly guy. You'd think somebody of his stature would kind of, go, but he didn't. He was very friendly and would take the time and talk to you.
I only met him one time and you know who Bobby Flowers is. He ex-policeman, and whenever he'd come to town, Bobby would always drive him around. And his last time at the Speedway, Jim and I were on the golf cart, and Bobby stopped, and Paul was very ill. He was in the back, and we did meet him, and that was the last time that he came to the Speedway. He was a true gentleman. And the story about when my mom and Lila were together in that motorhome, he was very kind to both of our mothers, and he was just a true gentleman, like our dad, and Dwayne Sr.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's got to have been an interesting life. When you were born, you probably, neither one of you obviously had any clue what life had in store for you. Then your father is a 1 in a million guy, a super guy, did a lot of things, was good to people. People loved him. And it had to start your life out as youngsters kind of interesting, rather than sitting at home and playing in the sandbox.
The night I was born, I don't know if you remember the name Bill Taylor. The night I was born, and so was Johnny, in Newhall, California. I was born in 42. Johnny was in 44. And the night I was born, there was a midget race up at Barnelli Speedway in Saugus, which is just a few miles up from Newhall. And so Bill drove the car that night for Dad, his midget, and he won that night. But we're from Johnny and I were born in Newhall. Patty is an original Valley girl. She was born in Van Nuys, her mother too. She's a Valley girl.
Wow.
But what's the race driver that drives for Andretti? He was Harding Steinbrenner. What's his name? The new one.
Colton Herta.
Colton Herta.
Yeah.
Went to Newhall High School, and I've got to talk to him. He went to William S. Hart High School, and that's where all of my uncles went. I went to grade school there, but it's a small world, isn't it? Yes. What a fantastic race driver that kid is, and is gonna be. I'm telling you.
It's interesting what has transpired with the Road to Indy program. I just had Dan Anderson on last week. We just put him up on the internet, as a matter of fact, and what that series has done to bring kids along. When your dad was coming up, they didn't have that. You had to prove yourself on the dirt tracks and get noticed and win, which he did. The days of that have changed dramatically, needless to say.
That started about the time of Johnny and Pancho, that era, where at first you didn't have to bring money and buy a ride.
Right.
You did it like our dads did with your talent. And then right about the time of Pancho and Johnny going into IndyCar, that's when you had to start getting, most of the time, I think, getting your own money and sponsors. And it wasn't easy, and it shortened a lot of good race drivers' time behind the seat.
In fact, it put a lot of them that had the ability and should have been here, couldn't get here because they didn't have the funding behind them. That's changing a little bit. There are some companies now that are stepping up. There's a new team that hopefully will be announced in the next month or so, coming in with a young driver. And they're going out and finding the sponsors. They said, we don't want a driver with money. We want the money, and we'll hire who we want. And it's getting a little bit back to that. So
that's good.
As they say, what goes around comes around. So it's getting back to the day when your dad drove. And Joni, I think you were alive when your dad won, obviously, but you weren't at the racetrack.
Johnny and I were at our grandmother's in Newhall, California, listening to it on the radio. Then the next year I got to go, and then the next year Johnny came in 52 after Dana was born. But yes, it was quite the thrill because Dad said hello to us on the radio. Yeah, he did. He said hello to us. Yeah, it really was. And we were just thrilled to death. Yep, it was thrilling. And Dad would come visit us in Newhall, and Newhall isn't very far from Van Nuys, because after Dad won the Speedway, he and Lila bought the house in Van Nuys and lived there until he passed away. He passed away in that house when did he pass away, honey? 90 or 83?
84.
84. Yeah, and then our Dana Carter died, I think, the year before. But there's a funny story. It's not funny, but it's a funny story about our family. My, the Carter boys, we all the same mom, but our Down syndrome brother, Tony, he passed away a few years ago. He lived at 52. A lot of people know him from the races and everything. He was a wonderful young man. He said about Patty and mine and Johnny's dad, it was his other dad. he called our dad his other dad, because my dad just loved him and made over him, and he called him his other dad. It was so cute.
Well, Patty, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to enlist you. You can't see that closely from where you are, but I need makeup and hair. I don't have a lot of hair, but what there is needs to be fluffed up to look better. So when you're in town, either in August or October, I'm going to have to contract you to come and poof me up a little.
Absolutely. Love to.
Well, it's a shame they're not running this weekend, because the celebration for your dad's 70th win, or 70th anniversary of his win would have been a fun to be around you folks at the time. But I'm sure you will probably celebrate it, knowing Joni and Jim. You'll do something.
Well, I think they're going to get the car out. I do think I've talked to them at the museum. I think they're going to get the car out, and they're going to get all the even numbers out, but I'm not sure. I don't want to spill the beans on anything, but I think they are getting Dad's out, and I don't know when, but I am hoping, and I've suggested that our nephew, Johnny's oldest son, Johnnie Parsons III, who still races now in Minnesota, and he just won a sprint car championship, and one of those small sprint car series up there in that area. And I'm hoping they'll let a third generation drive the car around the track.
Well, they're talking about, I read in the paper that I think IndyStar.com is doing something, and somebody else said, no, it's going to be on NBC. They're going to have a pre-race live from the start-finish line with Simon Pagenaud and Alexander Rossi. And I suspect if they're going to do something, that would be probably when they take the car out and run it, I would think. And then they're going to run last year's race.
I don't know if they would that. I'll have to call and ask somebody, but I would hope that they would do it before the race in August or October.
Well, they can do it then too. It's still run.
There is an engine in it. Yeah, I talked to Donald. There is an engine in it There wasn't a few years ago. They borrowed it to put it in Vuki's car or somebody's, but there is one in it now. Patty and I are sponsors of it. You know, at the Speedway now you can sponsor a car and have your name on a placard. So Patty and I are sponsoring dads, and we give a little bit of money, and they work on it with that money to keep it in shape and shined up and everything. So we're hoping that's what happens. He's a fine young man, and he did a lot of flipping at our track on 16th Street. But
Yeah.
he turned out to be a good, you know, he went to Indiana State, graduated from there. And he went to Minnesota and married and has a little girl. Jimmy lives in town too, I think, and he has a girl. So Gabrielle.
It's good. It's amazing the number of Parsons still involved in the business, in the sport. It's great. It says a lot about the sport and a lot about the people. Listen, I want to thank the two of you for taking the time. Patty, it was nice meeting you, and I hope everything is well out in Connecticut.
Thank you so much for having us. This is really
Yeah, well, Joni and I have been talking about it for a while, and I said I think the perfect time would be right before the race. Well, since there isn't one, we're going to try and air this weekend when it would have been the race, so people can see it. But I want to thank both of you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Tell Jim I said hello.
I will.
I won't be calling you 3 times a day anymore.
Oh, darn.
Nice to talk to both of you. Thanks for your time, and I'll let you know when it's on the internet and you can watch yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Been talking to 2 of Johnnie Parsons' kids. John Jr., who's here, didn't make it. He must have been painting windows or something. I don't know, but he didn't make it. But the 2 sisters were here, and we enjoyed talking with them. And this weekend would have been the 70th anniversary of Johnnie Parsons' win at the Indianapolis 500. He was a great guy. He was in movies. He was official in racing. It was his life. And we need to honor the man and thank his daughters for being here. We have some more programming upcoming. So you'll be getting announcements from time to time of upcoming guests. In fact, we got 2 we're going to do tomorrow, so they'll be up next week sometime. But excuse me. Until the next time we're here, this is Don Kay saying thanks for watching. Till next time, goodbye.